him.
What he did after that, he called two congresses, one at Erzurum for the eastern provinces, which were threatened by an invasion from the Armenian Republic, led by General Antranik, which was causing a great deal of damage, which was killing a lot of Turks in northeastern Turkey. This has been reported on by the American missions there and by British missions, that these Armenian troops were killing a lot of Turks.
At the Sivas Conference, Mustafa Kemal rejected the armistice signed with the great powers, which gave away most of the Ottoman Empire. This new coalition declared a war of independence against all enemies who would destroy their nation with war and massacre.
After 1918, Armenian bands, terror organizations, and Armenian soldiers fighting in the Russian army committed large-scale massacres in the regions occupied by the Russians. As the Russians began to retreat, in the Igdir region alone, they committed massacres in 21 villages.
Besides the invading Greeks in the west and Armenians in the east, Mustafa Kemal had to deal with a third front in the south, where Armenians continued their slaughter with the help of France. Landing in the Mediterranean in late 1918, the French used Armenian rebels in capturing the city of Adana. There they pushed northward. An Armenian legion had been formed, and it immediately began to attack the Muslim population.
The French have a very important role in the clashes between the Turks and Armenians in southeastern Turkey, the Çukurova and Cilicia regions. Thousands of Armenian volunteer fighters wearing French uniforms fought against Turks. French archival documents verify this, not only ours.
The French promised their Armenian forces that Adana and the surrounding region, known as Cilicia, would become part of a great Armenian nation. But their plans backfired. The Armenian Legion committed so many atrocities against the Muslims that it had to be disbanded. The dream of an independent Armenian state in Cilicia was shattered by the advance of Kemalist forces. The French and Armenians had to withdraw, and the Turks reclaimed the region. But on the Armenian question, a very powerful man still stood in their way. The great powers called upon President Woodrow Wilson of the United States to accept a mandate over territories claimed by the Armenians. It would be a way of including the Americans in the final breakup of the Ottoman Empire. Wilson's heart was with the Armenians. A devout Christian, he sympathized with their desire to separate themselves from their Muslim neighbors. In the fall of 1919, Wilson sent General James Harbord on a fact-finding mission to eastern Anatolia and the Caucasus region. Harbord and his commission spent 6 weeks in the area, evaluating the state of affairs regarding Turks and Armenians.
General Harbord from United States was sent to observe, analyze the situation in eastern Anatolia in order to search whether an Armenian mandate can be established or not. And in his report, he also stressed that Armenians were not majority in any part of eastern Anatolia, and that statement was an important factor not to take an Armenian mandate by the American government.
During his mission, Harbord learned of the horrible massacres that had been committed and were still being committed. He also discovered that most of the victims were Muslim.
The conclusion of the report was not really for or against the mandate. General Harbord wrote 12 reasons for and 12 reasons against why the United States should or could accept the mandate. And this was debated at the Congress, and the Congress, something like 57 to 26 votes, voted against the U.S. mandate in Eastern Anatolia.
General Harbord reported to his superiors that, while good reasons existed for an Armenian mandate, compelling reasons also existed for rejecting the idea. One reason stood out among all others. The Armenians did not even come close to being a majority in Eastern Anatolia. The area was mostly populated by Muslim refugees who had suffered unspeakable horrors since the start of World War I. Yet their suffering was ignored by the West. Instead, they focused relief efforts on the Christian Armenians, raising millions of dollars for food, supplies, and clothing. As for the Muslims, they were on their own.
And the Armenians sent their army to invade other parts of the Caucasus and invade Eastern Anatolia, or Eastern Turkey. They were met by the army led by Kazım Karabekir, part of the Turkish National Army that was led by him. There were battles. Kazım Karabekir defeated them, pushed them all the way back to Yerevan, and they forced the Armenian Republic to sign a separate peace agreement with the Ottomans at Kars.
Armenian troops retreated toward the Yerevan province in the Caucasus, leaving Turkish soldiers to count the bodies of slaughtered Muslims, including 10,000 at Erzurum, 9,000 at Sarıkamış, 25,000 at Kars, and more than 70,000 at Nakhchivan.
Our archives reveal that in Anatolia, after the end of World War I, a total of 529,000 Turks were massacred by Armenians. All these dead are accounted for by name and their village, so we can provide even the names of those killed.
The Turkish army drove Armenian rebels back toward Yerevan, and a treaty was completed in the town of Gümrü on December 3, 1920. The tragic cycle of attack and massacre was finally coming to an end. Two years earlier, the Armenians established a republic in the Caucasus, with Yerevan as the capital. But their freedom was to be short-lived. The Armenian revolutionaries and nationalists had fought on the side of the Allies, only to suffer their betrayal in the end. Their dream of a new Armenian nation stretching from Adana to Yerevan had been a tragic illusion.
This was all part of the rivalry between these different powers, which didn't want to see one or the other in control. They all cut separate deals ultimately with the Turkish nationalists when they saw that the Sultan's government was no longer a viable force, and the Armenians were left, in a sense, in the lurch. More Armenians died, and ultimately the Armenians who were left living under Turkish control all emigrated.
Now then comes the big Armenian emigration. It's not 1915, it's 1920, when hundreds of thousands of Armenians, fearing retribution when the French collapse in southeastern Turkey, fled on French ships and went to North Africa, eventually to Marseilles, perhaps to the Lebanon, perhaps to French Syria. That's when the real emigration happens from Turkey.
In Ankara, Mustafa Kemal and his nationalist government were encouraged by the end of conflict with Armenia and the withdrawal of supporting British forces that had landed in the Caucasus. But in the West, the Greek army had advanced deep into Anatolia. In August 1922, Kemalist forces launched a counteroffensive. The Greek forces retreated to the coastal regions, killing thousands of Muslim citizens along the way. At Izmir, Greek troops were evacuated, along with many refugees, by Allied ships. Suddenly, the city began to burn. Half of it was destroyed. The British quietly surrendered Istanbul in November 1922. Finally, Turkey was free from invasion.
The Greek army ran away, literally ran away, And so this new treaty, called the Treaty of Lausanne, because it was signed there, was put into force, which resulted in Turkey gaining not only the whole of Anatolia, but also eastern Thrace as well.
In the Swiss city of Lausanne, the Allies finally made peace with the Turks. A treaty was signed on July 24, 1923. The Armenian delegates to the conference and their claims to Turkish territory were ignored.
So all these states slowly dropped the Armenian issue. So when the Lausanne Treaty or Lausanne Conference was held, the Armenian issue was not brought up. The Armenian delegations were not invited.
In this building at Ankara, the first parliament of the Turkish Republic convened. The Ottoman Empire was officially dead. On October 29, 1923, Mustafa Kemal became the first president of the Turkish Republic. He extended the offer of citizenship to any former resident of the Ottoman Empire, including Armenians.
So with the Lausanne, it was established that Turks had their own nationality and national state. So with the Armenians, it was the other way around, because then they were occupied by the Russian troops, communist troops, Armenia, and then they lost their country.
The Armenian nation was short-lived. The Soviets signed a treaty with Turkey, and the Republic of Armenia fell under communist rule.
The Armenians, I must say, were never happy with that treaty. The Armenians claim that the Treaty of Moscow sold them down the river. And I think, well, in that sense, they're right, because it didn't give them what they wanted, which was Eastern Turkey.
Not until 1991 would Armenia gain its real independence. When World War I began, about 1.5 million Armenians lived in the Ottoman Empire. By 1922, the League of Nations estimated that nearly 900,000 Armenians had emigrated to Europe, the United States, and many other countries. The remainder, about 600,000 people, had lost their lives to famine, disease, exposure, and massacre. But the Muslims had fared far worse, losing more than 1 million people in eastern Anatolia. More than 500,000 of them, men, women, and children, were massacred by Armenian soldiers, rebels, and civilians. The majority of Armenians in the Ottoman Empire had no interest in revolution, but they had been forced to choose sides in a deadly game. In later years, these rebels who sacrificed so many lives for their cause must have asked themselves a question during those sleepless nights when they were haunted by memories of their victims. They must have asked themselves, was our dream really worth the cost?